What would you do if the storm outside your door carried not just danger, but destiny? On a night when the wind howled like 1,000 ghosts, a grieving widow faced the terror of men who would burn her home and silence her forever. 2 children clung to her, a warrior fought beside her, and death stood waiting just beyond the flames. And yet, through fire and fear, a single golden feather rose, a symbol of trust, of courage, and of a bond that could bridge 2 worlds. Friends, I'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story that brings light through the storm. The Black Hills in the winter of 1878 were more than mountains and snow. They were a world carved in silence and shadow, alive with the sound of wind that screamed like 100 lost voices. Pines bowed beneath the weight of ice, their limbs cracking as if in protest. The ground lay buried beneath layers of snow so deep that even deer trails vanished, leaving behind only a blank page of white. To live here was to wrestle each day with a land that demanded both reverence and sacrifice. And in this wild, unyielding place stood a small cabin, its walls dark with years of weather, its chimney coughing pale smoke into the storm. Inside lived a woman the town had long whispered about, Eleanor Whitfield. 32 years old, though her face carried the shadow of years far heavier. She was not tall, but carried herself with a straightness that spoke of stubborn endurance. Her hair, chestnut once, now dulled by grief and cold, fell in loose strands around her face. Her eyes were gray, storm gray, and they held something that unsettled strangers, a gaze that seemed always fixed on something beyond the present, something lost. She wore a wool dress faded to near brown, patched more than once by her own hand, and an old shawl that still faintly carried the scent of cedar. Widow. That word clung to her like frost on glass. Caleb Whitfield, her husband, had been gone 3 winters now, taken by a logging accident in the gulch below town. She had never left the cabin they built together, not because the land was kind, but because it was cruel. Cruel enough to remind her of him every hour, every season. Sometimes she thought the land itself held him, his breath in the wind, his shadow in the ridges, his laughter echoing through the pines. She stayed because leaving would mean letting go, and letting go felt like betrayal. Her only companion was Bruno, a massive mongrel with a coat of black and russet fur, his ears too large for his head and his chest broad like a bear's. He was loyal as the earth itself, padding after Eleanor wherever she went, sleeping at her feet at night, watching the door as though guarding both her and the ghost of the man she loved. To the town, Eleanor was a reclusive widow who had turned her back on church socials and Sunday gatherings. But to Bruno, she was the center of his world. That evening, the storm had begun its slow crawl across the hills. The wind carried a strange edge, a pitch that warned of worse to come. Eleanor had just finished stacking firewood against the hearth, her hands stiff in the cold despite her gloves. She sat before the fire with a tin cup of tea, Bruno lying near, his tail thudding once against the floorboards. Her gaze wandered to the mantel where a single-frame photograph sat their wedding portrait. Caleb, broad-shouldered, with unruly hair and a grin that dared the world to challenge him. Herself, younger, eyes wide with the certainty that love could endure any storm. Her lips tightened. She had tried once to put the picture away, but the silence of the cabin had grown too heavy. So it remained, a constant companion, as though Caleb himself watched over her shoulder. That was the twist of her life. Grief did not vanish. It lived on. It breathed beside her. It held her in place. Outside, the snow thickened. Wind hammered the shutters. Bruno's ears twitched. He lifted his head, nose working at the air. Eleanor glanced toward him. "Not tonight," she murmured. "It's only the storm." But Bruno's body tensed. His growl, low and rumbling, filled the small cabin. She set down her cup. Her heart gave a sudden, sharp beat. Bruno rose, tail stiff, hackles up, eyes fixed on the door. His growl rose into sharp barks, urgent, commanding. Eleanor felt the familiar chill, the sense of being tested by the wilderness. Her first thought was wolves. They roamed closer in winters like this, drawn by hunger, yet there was something in Bruno's bark, something she hadn't heard before. He was not warning her of an animal. He was demanding she pay attention, right now. The storm howled outside, snow hissing against the door. Eleanor's hand trembled as she reached for the lantern. She pulled on her coat, its wool heavy and worn, and tied the scarf under her chin. Bruno pressed to the door, barking in bursts, then stopping, ears straining as if listening to something she could not yet hear. "Easy, boy," she whispered, though her voice betrayed her. She lifted the latch. The door shuddered under the wind, blasting snow into the room as it creaked open. Darkness beyond. Alive. Swirling. Endless. Bruno lunged forward, but Eleanor caught his collar. Together they stood at the threshold, the light of the lantern spilling weakly into the storm. And then she thought she heard it. Not the cry of wolves, not the moan of timber in the gale. Something thinner, fragile. A sound carried on the wind like glass breaking yet not glass. A sound that froze her more than any winter could. A cry. Eleanor froze in the doorway, lantern trembling in her hand, as Bruno pulled forward with sudden force. The storm screamed around them, but that sound rose again. Faint, human, impossibly out there in the white. She stepped into the snow. The storm did not ease. It pressed harder, blinding the hills with its fury. Snow swirled in torrents, each flake like a shard of glass. Eleanor's lantern flickered in her hand, its glow a fragile pearl swallowed by the dark. Bruno strained forward, dragging her boots through drifts that climbed to her knees. Her breath turned sharp, shallow, white clouds torn away by the wind. Every step screamed of danger. Every step dared her to turn back. But then, there it was again. The cry. Thin, weak, human. She pressed on. The hills seemed alive, shifting in the shadows of the storm. Wind roared down the gulch, bending the pines until their branches clawed the air. Eleanor's scarf whipped against her cheek, the wool stung by ice. She forced herself to follow Bruno, whose nose carved a trail through the chaos. He lunged suddenly to the left, barking, and she stumbled after him, lantern raised. The light fell upon two small shapes. At first she thought they were logs buried in snow. But then one moved. A frail arm, a whisper of motion. She dropped to her knees. Two boys. The older lay curled around the smaller, shielding him as if the storm itself were an enemy. The younger's lips were blue, lashes heavy with frost. The older's eyes flicked open at the light, wide, sharp, filled with a fire that had not been extinguished by the cold. "Dear God," Eleanor breathed. The older boy clutched the younger tighter, his knuckles white. He could not have been more than 9 years old, yet his gaze struck Eleanor like an arrow, not pleading, not begging, but wary. The look of someone who had learned too soon that the world was cruel. The smaller child whimpered, his chest rattling with shallow breaths. 6 years old, no more. His hair dark and tangled, cheeks hollowed by hunger. Eleanor set the lantern in the snow, hands trembling. "You're freezing. You'll die out here." The older boy's jaw tightened. He said nothing, only pressed his chin to his brother's hair. Bruno whined softly, lowering his massive head near them, tail still but ears forward. The younger boy's hand twitched and brushed against the dog's muzzle, a flicker of life small but real. Eleanor hesitated. She felt the storm clawing at her back, demanding she make a choice. If she left them, the snow would claim them within minutes. If she took them in, the town would whisper louder than ever. Sioux children. Everyone would know, and they would not forgive. Her heart clenched. She saw Caleb's face in memory, his laughter, his reckless courage. "Do the right thing, Elle," his voice seemed to whisper, "even if it costs you everything." She tore her shawl free, wrapping it around the younger child. "Hold on," she whispered. "You're safe now." The older boy's eyes narrowed, watching her every movement. Still silent, still guarding. Yet he allowed her arms to slip beneath his brother's body. The child was frighteningly light, his small head lolling against her shoulder. She shifted, then reached for the older boy's arm. "Come," she urged. For a heartbeat, he resisted. His eyes blazed with suspicion. He clutched a leather strap that hung around his neck, a small pouch, worn but carefully guarded. Then, with a reluctant breath, he rose unsteadily to his feet, never breaking his gaze from her face. And in that look, Eleanor saw it. Recognition. Bloodlines she had only heard spoken of in whispers, his high cheekbones, the braids stiff with frost, the dignity in the way he stood, even as his body shook with cold. This was no lost orphan. This was the son of a chief. The revelation struck her like lightning. These were not strays. These were the children of Sioux leadership, and if she saved them, she was stepping into a war that was not hers. "God help me," she murmured. The wind surged, nearly toppling her. Bruno barked, circling, urging her onward. Eleanor gathered the smaller child into her arms, her muscles burning from the weight. The older boy staggered beside her, refusing her hand, his jaw clenched against the storm. Step by step, they fought their way back through the drifts, the lantern swaying wildly. At last, the cabin rose out of the darkness, its roof glowing faintly with firelight. Relief nearly brought her to her knees. She forced the door open, and the storm hurled her inside. Bruno leapt in after them, shaking snow across the floor. The warmth of the fire hit her face. She lowered the younger child onto the cot, pulling blankets from the chest. His skin was icy, breath shallow. She rubbed his arms briskly, whispering prayers beneath her breath. The older boy remained by the door, eyes darting around the cabin. He stood like a sentinel, small, ragged, yet unbreakable. His chest rose and fell in sharp, guarded breaths. He made no move toward the fire. He only stared, his gaze locked on Eleanor, on every motion she made, as if judging whether she was friend or foe. She glanced up. "What's your name?" Silence. "Mine is Eleanor." She tried again. "This is Bruno." The dog padded over, sniffed the boy's hand. For the first time, the boy blinked. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Then, faintly, the smaller child whispered, "Samuel." His eyes fluttered half open, unfocused. "Brother!" The older boy turned sharply to him, dropping to his knees. He gripped his brother's hand, the firelight catching the sheen of tears that refused to fall. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, edged with steel. "My name is Samuel. This is Micah." Eleanor froze. Samuel, Micah, names that carried weight. She had heard them whispered in town, linked to stories of the Sioux encampment beyond the hills. The realization deepened. The pouch at Samuel's neck, decorated with beadwork, was not trinket, but heritage. These were the sons of a chief. Her heart thundered. She knew what it meant. By saving them, she had crossed an invisible line. If the wrong ears heard, she would be marked as traitor. The wind battered the cabin walls as if echoing her dread. Bruno lay close by, watching all three with solemn eyes. The fire cracked. The storm screamed, and Eleanor, for the first time in years, felt the ground shifting beneath her. Eleanor pulled the blankets higher around Micah and looked to Samuel, who still crouched like a warrior in miniature, his hand gripping his pouch, his eyes unyielding. Outside, the storm raged, but a greater storm waited in the town below. Saving them was not just mercy, it was defiance. And somewhere deep inside, she knew her life had changed forever. The storm began to quiet, though its breath still lingered across the hills, rattling the cabin walls as if reminding them it was not gone, only resting. Inside, the fire burned steady, throwing long shadows across the floorboards. The smell of pine resin filled the air, thick and sharp, mingling with the faint tang of wet wool steaming by the hearth. Micah slept now, his small chest rising and falling beneath the pile of blankets. Eleanor sat near, one hand resting lightly on his arm, as though her touch alone might tether him to life. His face, softened by warmth, had lost its bluish tint. He was fragile, yet he clung on. Across the room, Samuel remained upright, perched on the edge of a stool. He was a boy, yes, but the way his spine stayed straight, the way his eyes roamed the cabin walls, spoke of something older. His dark hair clung in damp strands around his face. In the flicker of firelight, his features sharpened, revealing the unmistakable lines of heritage Eleanor knew the town would recognize if they ever looked too closely. Bruno dozed in the corner, his massive frame curled like a sentinel at rest, though his ears twitched at every crack of timber outside. Eleanor drew a deep breath. The cabin, usually a place of silence and grief, had become something new, a place full of fragile sounds. The faint rustle of a boy shifting under blankets, the scrape of charcoal against wood, because Samuel, unable to stay still, had found a piece of charred pine and begun drawing on a plank near the hearth. At first, Eleanor thought it nothing more than a child's attempt to pass the time. But as the lines grew bolder, clearer, her chest tightened. It was not idle. It was testimony. Figures emerged, men on horseback, their rifles raised, a tipi collapsing in flame, a man falling, arms spread wide, hair streaming behind him. Samuel's strokes grew harsher, darker, until the wood itself seemed to scream with the violence of it. Eleanor leaned closer, her throat tightening. Who is he?" she whispered, pointing at the figure in the center. Samuel's jaw set. His voice, low and firm, carried the weight of a boy too young to bear such grief. "My father." The word struck like a hammer. Eleanor sat back, clutching the arm of the chair. She had known somewhere deep inside, but hearing it torn from the boy's lips made it unshakable. These were not simply children lost in a storm. They were hunted. Samuel's eyes burned as he looked at her. Declan Whitmore. His English was broken but sharp. He killed my father. He wants us dead too. Eleanor's stomach turned to stone. She knew the name. Everyone in the valley did. Declan Whitmore, a man whose wealth and ruthlessness stretched from Deadwood to the plains. He owned men like other people owned cattle. And if Samuel spoke true, if Whitmore was behind their flight, then danger was closer than Eleanor dared imagine. The fire popped. Micah stirred and whimpered. Eleanor pressed a hand to his forehead, feeling the heat of fever. She whispered softly, her voice breaking against the quiet. Then 3 knocks at the door. Bruno leapt up with a growl, hackles bristling. Eleanor's heart slammed. Samuel was on his feet in an instant, eyes wide, hand gripping the pouch at his chest. She rose, palms clammy, and cracked the door. There, wrapped in furs dusted white, stood Agatha Coleman. Agatha was a woman of 50, short and stout, with a face lined deep from years of prairie wind. Her eyes were quick, darting like sparrows, always seeking something to carry back to town. A basket of bread swung from her arm, steam rising from the cloth draped over it. "Evenin', Eleanor," she said, her voice high and sharp, like a needle slipping into cloth. "Storm's letting up. Thought you might be needin' something warm." Eleanor forced a smile, stepping slightly to block the view inside. "That's kind of you, Agatha, but I'm managing." Agatha sniffed, tilting her head. Her eyes flicked past Eleanor's shoulder. The firelight behind her betrayed too much shadow shifting, a small cough. Her gaze narrowed. "What's that noise?" she asked. Eleanor's throat tightened. "Bruno," she said quickly. He caught a chill. Poor thing. Bruno, as if on cue, gave a soft grunt, but it was not enough. Agatha's eyes sharpened. "Funny." Sounded like a child. Eleanor's blood froze. Before she could answer, Micah let out a faint whimper from the cot. Bruno barked over it, but not quick enough. Agatha's brows shot up, her lips curling into a knowing smile. "Well now," she murmured. "That's a surprise." She leaned forward, lowering her voice, though her eyes glittered with triumph. "You've got company, don't you?" Eleanor stepped outside quickly, pulling the door nearly shut behind her. The wind slapped her face, snow stinging her cheeks. "Agatha," she said firmly, "whatever you think you heard, leave it. The storm's playing tricks." But Agatha was already retreating, basket swaying. "Oh, I'll leave it, Eleanor," she called over her shoulder, voice sharp with satisfaction. "But I reckon the town will want to hear of it. A widow keepin' secrets. Folks won't like that." Her laugh, high and cruel, vanished into the wind as she trudged away. Eleanor stood in the snow, heart hammering. The storm had quieted, but inside her chest, another raged louder than ever. She closed the door and turned back to the children. Samuel's face was hard, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. Micah stirred, whispering his brother's name, and Eleanor realized Agatha's words would not stay secrets. By dawn, the town would know. And once they knew, danger would come walking up her hill, carrying Whitmore's name on its back. Agatha's footsteps faded into the storm, carrying whispers sharper than blades. Inside the cabin, Samuel's charcoal drawing lay unfinished, firelight gleaming across the figure of a man falling. Eleanor stared at it, knowing what awaited. Danger had been given a mouth, and now it would spread. The cabin held its breath after Agatha left. The storm had quieted, yet the silence felt sharper, as if the land itself braced for what was coming. Eleanor sat by the fire, her hands tight in her lap, eyes drawn again and again to the door. Samuel's charcoal drawing remained on the plank, the dark figure frozen mid-fall, firelight glimmering across its jagged lines. Then Bruno growled, not the warning he gave to the wind, not the restless bark of hunger. This was low, primal. His hackles lifted, teeth flashing in the glow. The door rattled. Eleanor stood swiftly, lantern in hand, heart hammering. Her mind leapt to Agatha's words. Had Whitmore's men already come? She reached for the rifle propped against the wall, her knuckles white around the stock. The door burst open, snow swirled in with the gust, and through it stepped a figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark braids hung heavy with snow, beads woven into them, glinting faintly. His eyes were flint, burning in the lantern light, and his chest rose with the deep, steady breath of a man who had crossed miles in silence. His presence filled the small cabin instantly, commanding, dangerous. Nathaniel Hawk Redfeather. Eleanor knew without asking. His resemblance to Samuel was too sharp, the same cheekbones, the same fire in the eyes. But where Samuel's gaze carried the raw steel of youth, Hawk's bore the tempered edge of a man hardened by years of battle. He moved swiftly, every muscle taut, his bow still strung, an arrow half raised before words even passed between them. His gaze locked on Eleanor, then the rifle in her hands. "You!" he hissed, voice deep, accented, each word bitten off. "What have you done with them?" Bruno lunged forward, barking thunder. Samuel leapt from his stool, planting himself between Hawk and Eleanor, arms spread. "No!" Samuel shouted, voice cracking with urgency. "She helped us!" "She saved Micah." Hawk froze, the arrow tip wavering. His eyes flicked to his brother, then to the small bundle on the cot. Micah stirred, a soft cough breaking the tension. Hawk's chest shuddered once, as though he had been holding his breath for miles. He lowered the bow. For the first time, Eleanor saw more than a warrior. She saw a brother. Relief softened his jaw, and he dropped to one knee beside Micah. His calloused hand brushed the boy's cheek, gentle as snowfall. Micah's lips parted. "Hawk," he whispered. The word cracked open the room. Eleanor lowered her rifle, though her arms trembled still. Hawk looked up at her, suspicion not yet gone, but tempered now with something else, gratitude he could not easily voice. "You took them in," he said slowly. Eleanor swallowed hard. "I couldn't leave them to die in the storm." Hawk's gaze searched her face, lingering, weighing her words. Silence stretched. The fire snapped in spit sparks. Bruno, sensing the shift, settled reluctantly back to the floor, though his amber eyes remained fixed on Hawk. Samuel crept closer, standing tall beside his brother. For the first time since entering her cabin, Eleanor saw the boy relax. Just slightly, shoulders easing. But peace was brief. Hawk's head turned suddenly, his body taut as a bowstring. He stepped to the door, pulling it wider, listening. Eleanor followed his gaze. Through the hush of falling snow came another sound, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Horses. Multiple. Their hooves muffled yet relentless, pressing closer across the drifts. Whitmore's men. Eleanor's stomach lurched. Hawk's hand closed into a fist. "They have followed," he said, voice grim. "Your neighbor's tongue is faster than the storm." The weight of it hit Eleanor like a blow. Agatha's laugh in the wind returned to her ears. Her knees weakened, but she steadied herself against the doorframe. "What do we do?" she whispered. Hawk's eyes narrowed, his expression carved from stone. He turned to Samuel, then to Micah, his hand tightening on the bow. "We stand together." Eleanor felt a spark ignite within her chest, fierce and terrifying. She was no warrior, no fighter of men. She was a widow, bound by grief. Yet as she looked at the children, at the warrior kneeling to guard them, she realized the truth. She had already chosen her side. Her grip on the rifle steadied. Outside, the sound of hooves grew clearer, accompanied by the muffled shouts of men. Lantern light flickered faintly in the distance, moving through the trees like fireflies of war. Hawk stepped beside Eleanor, their eyes meeting. For a heartbeat, neither spoke, but in that silence, an understanding forged itself, fragile, unspoken, and binding. Not strangers, not enemies, allies. The lanterns drew nearer, their glow spilling like blood across the snow. Hawk's voice, low and resolute, broke the silence. "They are here." Eleanor's hands tightened on the rifle, her heart a drum in her chest. The cabin walls seemed to close in around them, and for the first time she understood. Survival would demand more than courage. It would demand trust. The first crack of a whip split the night. Then came the ring of hooves, circling, closing in. The cabin stood like a lone sentinel beneath the swollen moon, its timbers trembling as though they sensed the danger pressing closer. Bruno's growls rumbled low and constant, vibrating through the floorboards. Eleanor tightened her grip on the rifle, her breath sharp in her chest. Lanterns flared beyond the tree line, dozens of them. Their glow moved like restless fireflies, weaving between black trunks, edging closer until shadows of mounted men stretched across the snow. The night smelled of smoke and sweat, carried on the biting wind. Hawk stood near the window, bow drawn, every line of his body taut. Samuel crouched beside him, Micah pressed tight to his chest, both boys' faces pale in the firelight. Eleanor's eyes flicked between them, fear clawing at her, but something else rising to resolve. Then a voice cut through the cold. "Eleanor Whitfield!" The name rang loud, smooth, practiced. Declan Whitmore. From the doorway, Eleanor saw him clearly now. He sat astride a tall, gray stallion, his frame wrapped in a heavy fur coat that gleamed against the torchlight. His hat brim shadowed a face too polished for these Hills' sharp jaw, neatly trimmed beard, eyes glinting like steel. He held his reins with one hand, a revolver gleaming in the other. Behind him, a ring of hired men spread wide, rifles across their laps. "Bring them out," Whitmore called. His smile was cold, deliberate. "Hand me the boys, and no harm will come to you." Eleanor's throat tightened. She glanced at Hawk, his jaw set, eyes burning. She lifted the rifle, stepping into the doorway, the barrel steady despite the quiver in her gut. Her voice rang back, stronger than she thought possible. "You'll get nothing from me." For a moment, silence clung to the clearing. Then Whitmore laughed, a sound slick as oil. "A widow with a gun," he said, mockery dripping from every word. "Do you think you frighten me?" Eleanor's finger curled tighter on the trigger. She thought of Caleb, thought of his broad shoulders bent in laughter, thought of how he would have stood here, not weak, not begging. A tremor passed through her, not of fear, but of something fierce, protective. A crack split the air. Her shot rang out. One of Whitmore's men jerked and toppled from his horse. The clearing erupted. Gunfire thundered, bullets sparking against the cabin walls. Hawk loosed an arrow, striking true. Bruno barked furiously, leaping to the doorframe, teeth bared. Samuel clutched Micah tighter, dragging him toward the cellar hatch Eleanor had left ajar. Inside, the cabin turned into a furnace of sound rifle fire. Shouts, the splinter of wood. Eleanor moved with sharp precision, reloading, firing again, her body driven by something deeper than fear. No longer the grieving widow, chained to memory. She was something else now, a defender. But Whitmore was clever. He raised a hand and the gunfire slowed. Then came the hiss, the unmistakable crackle. Flames. Two of his men tossed torches onto the cabin roof. Fire caught, greedy orange tongues licking upward, smoke coiling thick against the stars. Heat rushed down in waves, the timbers groaning above. Hawk's face hardened. He dropped his bow, scrambled toward the rafters, his muscles straining as he pulled himself up the ladder. The fire roared, sparks raining around him. Eleanor shouted after him, but he did not look down. He climbed higher, his silhouette swallowed by smoke, until his hand beat at the fire itself. Below, Eleanor fought the panic rising in her chest. The roof was their shelter, their shield. If it fell, so would they all. She fired again, forcing Whitmore's men back. Though her arms ached, her lungs burned. The children cried softly, clinging to Bruno's thick fur for courage. Then the door crashed inward. Wood splintered, hinges screamed. Declan Whitmore himself strode through, revolver leveled, smoke curling around his shoulders like a crown of fire. His smile was gone now, replaced by something colder, hungrier. He stepped forward, gun steady, eyes locked on Eleanor. "This ends," he said softly. His revolver rose, the barrel aimed straight at her heart. The flames roared louder above, Hawk's shadow flickering in the smoke, but Eleanor's world narrowed to the gleam of Whitmore's gun. The distance between them was no more than breath. Time seemed to slow. Her finger brushed the trigger of her rifle, but his aim was already set. The night itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see whose fire would strike first. The revolver gleamed in Whitmore's hand, its barrel steady, its promise of death inches away. Smoke coiled between them, searing Eleanor's throat. The floorboards creaked as she shifted, rifle lifted, though her heart thundered so loud she thought it might betray her aim. Then Hawk's voice raw, urgent cut through the roar of fire above. "Now!" Eleanor moved, her body twisted, instinct overtaking fear. She ducked low, rifle snapping upward. Whitmore's shot cracked, splintering wood near her ear. She surged forward, seizing the nearest thing her hand could grasp, the iron skillet hanging by the hearth. Heavy, familiar, weighted with years of use. With a cry that shook her bones, she swung. The skillet slammed into Whitmore's temple with a sound that was half thunder, half justice. His eyes widened, the revolver falling from his grasp. He staggered, fury and disbelief mingling on his face, then collapsed to the floor, the cabin quaking with his fall. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Only the hiss of fire above and Eleanor's ragged breaths filled the air. Then Hawk dropped from the rafters, coughing through the smoke, his hands blackened but triumphant. The flames smothered beneath dampened hides. The boys rushed to Eleanor, clinging to her skirts, Bruno pressing close with a protective growl still humming in his chest. But the night was not finished. Boots thundered outside. More men. Then another voice, deeper, commanding. "Whitmore!" Through the shattered doorway stepped Sheriff Brody Miller. His presence filled the room in a way no outlaw ever could. Broad-shouldered, in his late 50s, his weathered face carried both the weight of law and the scars of compromise. Snow clung to his coat, his mustache frosted white, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. His revolver was already drawn, steady, unshaking. He took in the scene. The widow with the skillet raised, the fallen man at her feet, the Sioux warrior standing tall beside her, children trembling in the smoke. "What in God's name happened here?" Samuel stepped forward, his small frame rigid, eyes fierce. His voice, though thin, cut clear. "He killed our father. He hunted us." He pointed at Whitmore, sprawled unconscious on the floor. "Declan Whitmore." The sheriff's jaw tightened. His gaze swept over Hawk, then Eleanor, then the children. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he nodded once, decisive. "Get him in irons," he barked to the deputies behind him. "And mark my words, the court will hear this." Relief trembled through Eleanor, though her body still shook from battle. Her hands loosened their grip on the skillet, letting it fall with a dull clang to the floor. The sound echoed like the closing of one chapter of her life. Outside, the last of Whitmore's men scattered, unwilling to face both Hawk's wrath and the sheriff's authority. The night air rushed back into the cabin, icy but clean, carrying away the acrid tang of smoke. Hawk turned to Eleanor. For the first time since he had burst into her life, the hard line of suspicion in his face softened. His eyes, dark, steady, rich with unspoken weight, met hers. "You stood when no one else would," he said quietly. She opened her mouth, but words failed. All she could do was nod, tears streaking down soot-stained cheeks. Hawk reached into the pouch at his side. From it, he drew a single feather. It glowed in the lantern light, the golden hue of an eagle's plume, edges catching the faintest shimmer as though kissed by dawn. He held it out with both hands, reverent. "In my people's way," Hawk said, his voice carrying both solemnity and grace. "This is honor. This is family." Eleanor stared at it, her breath shallow. The feather trembled slightly between them, not from Hawk's hand, but from her own uncertainty. She had been many things: wife, widow, loner, survivor. But never this. Never a warrior. Her hands lifted, slow, trembling, until the feather lay across her palms. It was lighter than she imagined, yet it carried the weight of two worlds. The children smiled through their tears, Micah reaching to touch it with wonder. Bruno barked once, sharp as though sealing the moment. Sheriff Miller adjusted his hat, his gaze steady on Eleanor. "You've bought yourself more than survival tonight," he said. "You've bought yourself a place." Eleanor stepped outside into the crisp night, the snow reflecting pale moonlight. The feather caught the glow, shimmering like a small flame against the darkness. Hawk joined her, silent but steadfast, the children close by. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt the air not as an enemy to endure, but as a promise to breathe. The hills no longer loomed like tombstones. They rose like guardians, holding her story, her fight, her rebirth. She stood tall on the cabin's porch, the golden feather pressed to her chest. The storm had passed, but something greater remained. The bond forged in fire, blood, and courage. The wind shifted, carrying the faint cry of an eagle across the valley. It seemed to circle above them, unseen yet certain, blessing the ground beneath. And Eleanor, once only the widow of the hills, now stood as something far more enduring, the woman with the warrior's heart. Sometimes life forges strength in places we least expect. Eleanor began as a widow, chained by grief, yet through the storm she found the courage to fight, to protect, and to love again. Her journey reminds us that the heart of a warrior is not built from steel or fire, but from compassion, from standing for those who cannot stand alone, and from daring to believe that two worlds can be bound together by trust. And now, dear friends, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching this story from? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this tale touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you can join us for the next journey. Until then, may this story stay with you, bringing warmth to your day and hope to your heart.